So shall we start with the topic straight away, or do you want to have a little bit of a chit chat before and people can ask questions about their current challenges they have at home, at their work, or how do you run your normal meetings?
Yeah, we usually do that. I usually come up with a couple of news items just to
go
have
for
a bit of a scan through what I can find out. Unfortunately, I couldn't find much on the EMB site, so they didn't seem to have too much. I will share my screen now and
done. Good evening.
Here we go. All right, so we got that. We can see that. So the first one I thought about was this new release of iOS out for your phones if you're an Apple phone user, and basically it lets you turn off marketers from following you around and getting all your interests and things from the sites and everything that you've got. So that link's there, and I'll put that in the show notes, as they say. The other thing, I often get the Security Week briefings, which are interesting and always very scary to see what's going on. There's been a lot of the several recently with Microsoft and their Exchange server. There's always issues with browsers. Google Chrome, I think, had a 0 day which they released a week or so ago, and they've got another one out. So even though I'm set to have my Google Chrome update automatically, it doesn't always do that. And one way that I've found is that if you go into the settings, help, and about Google Chrome, it'll check for updates. So this is 0.85. I think the latest one is 0.90. And it'll update and you just relaunch and everybody's happy. So now I've got an updated Google Chrome. So that's about all my news. We have, as you're aware, Matias, you're going to be talking to us tonight regarding Google Calendar synchronization, which would be good if you synchronize your Google Calendar with an upgraded Google Chrome. That'd be a lot safer. But before we go on that, there's been, I've been in contact with Sue from Melbourne, who's on the National Committee, as you know, Matias, talking about the symposium. And we're talking about, the discussion is whether we're going to have a national online symposium. And for the Canberra people, whether there's any interest in getting together on the day, either to view it together or maybe just at the end of the day, just getting together for drinks and a post symposium party, breakup, whatever you want to call it.
Briefing.
Brief debrief.
What was your what was your good presentation of the day? Now, topics and speakers. Do you guys have any preferences when it comes to speakers? I mean, making it a digital symposium makes it much easier, right? To get some really good speakers that in the past have rather said no because they didn't want to travel that far.
Yeah.
So our chance now. You can throw anything in the mix, right? And we'll look at who might be interested to give a presentation at an ADUG symposium. And also we are thinking about how to continue with a membership. And the problem here is actually that we used to have our symposia now usually in April, and we see quite a few members not renewing their membership. Yeah. And we need to do something about the fact so that the members see ADUG as beneficial in their daily lives. And that's why we thought of making this symposium free for members, but let non-members pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I did actually see something about that, and I thought, oh, I thought we'd always paid for symposiums, but Obviously,
well,
if it's an online
there's
one,
so
it's
much free now online,
yeah,
right, that we can't really enforce that. But it would be a nice gesture to say, well, you're a member, you're a financial member, you can actually participate for free. But you've lapsed 2 years ago, so I'm sorry. If you want to participate, you need to pay. Yeah.
yeah, pay something.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So with that, I will hand over to you, Matias, if you want
Yeah.
to take control.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you can.
Yeah,
Share
not
your
yet. I say
screen.
share screen. Here we are. Good.
Yep.
Okay. Share the screen. And we go here. That was about Apple, right? I read something about Apple today too, right? And it's about the App Store and Spotify, and the European Commission is on it, right? And it looks like that if Apple doesn't agree with Spotify on something, they will actually impose hefty sanctions on the App Store in Europe, right? So that's coming their way, and Apple is fighting it as much as they can, but they have a bad stand because of a lack of tax payments in Europe, right? They've picked Ireland intentionally to avoid tax. Okay, so let me ask first, who of you has done anything with a Google API or a REST server out there in the past? Anyone who's done work?
Well, I've certainly used REST servers.
Mm-hmm.
I've looked at the Google API, but I haven't actually done anything with it, and that was many years ago.
Yeah.
So it's probably
So
all changed.
it's not so complicated to get a Google developer account, right? You don't need to pay for it in comparison to the Apple developer account, where you've got a yearly fee to be an Apple developer. And in Google Calendar, when you consider it for your application, you've got up to 1 million queries free per day. So you do not need to pay. Let's say you've got a small sized customer base, 200 customers, 400 customers, and all of them ask for certain appointments and so on 200 times a day, right? You would still be below the 1 million limit, which makes that quite interesting, right? There is lots and lots and lots of good API documentation out there, right? Unfortunately, nothing really written in Delphi, but if you need something that explains how you use a particular feature of the API, I found that Ruby was actually quite good and easier to understand than the JavaScript stuff. Yeah, I don't like JavaScript, right? And so, but if you're used to your JavaScript or Node.js, right, you can actually see how that's working. So let's have a look at an overview. And then we say we want to actually have a reference, and there's a calendar object here, and you can ask for a get, and it gives you all the calendars back for a particular account or for a calendar ID. So we can even test this here without having an application implemented yet, and that allows you to test that, right, quite thoroughly before you even start developing for it. Now, I looked at that, and in the meanwhile, since I started in 2014, that API had 2 major overhauls. So I was at API version 1 point something. Then in the middle of me developing, it was 2 point something, and by now we are at 3 point something. I'm so lucky that I didn't try to talk to that REST server directly, because things have changed considerably, right? And by me using the TMS VCL Cloud Pack, right, I was shielded from all that. Yeah, if you've got an account with Google, you can actually see how much traffic your server has actually created. And I move a little bit to the right so that you guys can't see the keys. But when we go for credentials over here, we can see that I've set up an API key for the Google Calendar. And in that API key for the Google Calendar, I said that there's one API application called API that is allowed to use the Google Calendar and only the Google Calendar and nothing else. And then when we look at the native client that I've set up in Google, it has some credentials. Let me move that out over here. I won't show everything, but you get a client ID and you get a secret. And with that one, you can do authentication against that Google server and use that account. You still need then a password and a username and a password once, right, to get the security token and the refresh token. But once you've done that, you can actually talk to the application server of Google at any time, right? So that's what I've done. So I've set up an account. I created a Google API for Google Calendar, and I set up a native client. Yeah, so that's it. Now I have then looked back then at options of making that really simple for me, because I'm a Delphi developer and like to solve business problems and not technology problems. And I figured out that actually Google Calendar is one of the many APIs that is supported. And I also found that when I encountered a problem, in particular, there was actually a query for calendar items that only returned 500 items. Now, if you have more than 500, you need paging, or you need to be able to say, I need more than 500. And I logged that as a support issue with the TMS team, and within let's see, 3 or 4 weeks, a newer version of TMS Cloud, TMS VCL Cloud Pack, actually supported what I needed for my application. So I was very, very happy with the responsiveness of TMS to do that. So for today, I've got a calendar here of my own where I've disabled all the different calendars, but we see that there is a test CRM, and I've started implementing this for a friend of mine who is working as an independent consultant for a health company that sells health equipment in Australia, that's also produced in Australia. So it's not cheap to buy that stuff. And he is a master consultant, meaning that he doesn't get any leads from the company, and he relies heavily on his own database. And he wanted to employ contract marketers, right? And they all had access to the same database. Marketers a subset of the features, and also there was the need of storing appointments and then propagating these appointments into the Google Calendar. Plus, what he wanted was an ability to say, I want to be able to write additional stuff against that calendar entry. And when this is actually then seen by the application, right, by my application, it shall store that as a note against the client, right, against the person record, so to speak. Yeah, so that was a bit of the requirement. So mainly pushing it out to Google, but occasionally fetching something from Google. Now, creating an entry completely in Google and then marrying it up to an existing person record or an appointment would still be possible, but the details you have when you say, I want to actually create a new Google Calendar entry here and say more options, you've got a title, you've got a location, and you've got a description. And if you think about how to marry that up to a person, there would be quite some extensive data in here that is not so easily human readable. It could be like an INI file, it could be an XML file, it could be a JSON file, but you would need to store stuff in here that a machine process could easily recognize as being the data for the person to which that appointment belongs. So for that reason, I could convince him that the method of kicking off an appointment is his application server or his application, right? And then once the appointment exists, I have a calendar item ID from Google that I store in my database. And with that, I can actually then fetch data from Google again and look into the description. And let's say there's something written in here from my application. We agreed on something like this. Yeah? And now he could type his note down here, and that meant that I was actually only importing that part into my database. Yeah, because I had the Google Calendar item ID already at that stage. Good. So let's discard that. Okay. So far, so good. Now I'm going into the virtual machine now, and I want to. Why is that? Power. I wanted to. No, I don't want to. Okay. Resume. I was there, and it kind of. Okay, here we are. The documentation is minimalistic. right? Because there are so much components in the TMS VCL Cloud Pack that you would have a huge, massive thing. But the good thing is all the source code is part of it, and you can learn from the source code. And the main properties on the calendar entry and on the calendars actually are explained here, and they are Delphi classes, right? So I'm not talking about REST server, I'm talking about a Delphi class, and we will see in a moment when we look at the example how simple it is to store an item in the calendar. For that, before we go into the complexity of running in the multi-threaded environment, I wanted to show you the sample application that comes with TMS Cloud Pack. And let's say we're going for that update here. So it actually sets the calendar item based on the selected item in this list here, right? And then it finds from the fields the summary, the description, and the whole operation of doing the update is actually here. So we've got this TMS Google Calendar component. If we go back, go into where it's actually defined, this is actually the control, a non-visual control that's on the form up here on this one, yeah. So, and we call update on it. And this is actually where now the component does all the nitty-gritty stuff of talking to the application server and finding out what the version 3 calendar API of Google expects. And I have to say that makes the programming so much easier. And I was very, very happy that it had that stuff. And I didn't go down the path of implementing the REST API myself initially. It's also because I had never done OAuth before, and that is quite complex. And I thought if I can get a component package that does that for myself, that's great. And back then I only paid 80 euro for that component package. And by now it's a little bit more, but I think you can still get it separately. You don't have to buy any of the bigger packages from TMS in order to speak to all these different servers out here. Facebook, Microsoft, PayPal, YouTube, you name it, it's all there for you. Yeah. So if we run this now and we are connecting, so I've already stored my token and so on, and I choose my test CRM and say I want to actually create a new item, and I say this is my test item, and I say this is ADUG. Oh, I can actually put it here, ADUG Canberra, and yeah, at that time that's good, and say insert, and this now means that I should find. Did he actually? Yeah, we've got actually this item in here. Yeah, and at the moment we see that it's got only the basics in it, but we can now actually go for it and say I want to make a change here and say description, and I want to update that. Yeah, please select an event first. So I need to select the event for which it is, and something happened here with the time slot. So I'm not quite sure why he did that, but we can actually set that back to 19 and set that back to 20. And put here a description in, and say maybe the title is updated, and say update. Oops, did I click on it now? Update, here we are, yep. So I go back into the Google Calendar and I refresh that. Here, you saw that. It moved it. I'm not quite sure why it's actually changing. Maybe it's got to do with the time zone, but we see that it's actually updated that stuff. Now, this is not happening in my application because I'm not dealing with the different time zones, but it seems that this application here also supports changing the time zone, and maybe he didn't recognize properly my time zone, Australia, Sydney. Yeah, that's why I may actually see my item here disappearing or moving on the calendar. So let's have a quick look so we understand the new one is actually creating a new item. Yeah, so we got a list item here, a calendar item. not a list item, but a calendar item. We set the calendar item from the controls. We add that item to the calendar, and then by doing so, it's actually storing it into the Google API. Any questions so far? No? Good. So that is kind of the structure on which the rest is based, right? So we do have a Google API account, we do have a TMS Cloud Pack, and we can actually define a refresh token and an access token to access a calendar securely without the user needing a password and a user account each time. Okay, so what about the database? So here we can have a look at my database design, and in particular of interest is the appointment table. And the appointment table has whatever the appointment table needs, plus 3 additional columns. One is called calendar item ID, which is a string of 250 characters. That is like a unique ID that Google assigns to a new calendar entry when it's stored in Google. So once you say add, you get that ID back, and you need to store it together with the record that created the Google Calendar entry in the first place. And then I have a DB change stamp and a calc change stamp. So if I'm encountering an appointment that has no calendar item ID, I know this is a new one, right? So it means it needs to go into the Google Calendar, and I store the calendar item ID against that appointment, and I say that the cal change stamp is now. And possibly even the DB change stamp is now as well. So it's done. Yeah. Later on, when that appointment is actually changed, I reset the cal change stamp to null, and I set the DB change stamp to something. Right. And that allows me to find which calendar items have been edited since I pushed them up to Google. And last not least, there is a possibility that a calendar item needs to be, or an appointment needs to be deleted. So it really shall be physically be removed from the database. So this is why you see up here a table called deleted calendar items. And it only has one column, and the column is the calendar item ID. So if you think what the process needs to do, well, he needs to look into the appointment table for any new stuff, for any changed stuff, and then he needs to look into the deleted calendar items for anything that's been deleted. And that can be done in an interval, let's say every minute or every 5 minutes, how fast you want to have your propagation happening, right? The good thing is it's only connecting as soon as it's found something. Right? So it's not connecting all the time to Google Calendar. It's first querying the database because that is way faster than figuring out that that it's actually necessary to talk to Google. So that is the first step. Find out is there something to do in the to-do list of calendar of the appointment table, and if yes, then we are connecting and we're trying to do that stuff. In my case, that is running in an application server, but Steve already mentioned to me that you guys are not using DataSnap or so, right? So if forget about DataSnap here, your application could be just a traditional client-server application. What you definitely want to have is that in the background, you don't want to be held up by the speed with which you communicate with Google Calendar. So this is why I would certainly suggest that the task of keeping this appointment table in sync with what's out there at Google should be happening in its own thread. Yeah. Plus, I want to be able to test that. That was some of the things that I said to Steve when we draw up the blurb for tonight. So now we come to the real implementation and how this is working and how I can actually test this. So I'm going for my project group, and I need to move that a little bit out so I've got more space. And here we are. That is the test case. So let's see. There's a U test as sync Google Calendar items. So my test case needs to prove that I can add a calendar item, that I can edit a calendar item, and that I can delete a calendar item. So those are the 3 test cases. And in order to test this, I've actually implemented this in a module, which in my case is a server-side module. That's why I called it TSVM, but this could be a data module. Yeah, this could be a regular data module on your client side. Do Doing it that way means it would still run in the main thread, but we get to that in a moment, right? So if I look at the test case of adding one, right? So I'm actually putting putting something into the node, putting an appointment into the database, and then I say to my synchronization module, would you please be so kind to process any changes in the appointment table? Yeah, that is the core of it, right? And this one does a few things. First of all, it's opening a query to see what's been changed. And if there's anything changed, it's actually only then authenticating to the Google Calendar. So if we look into that authenticate, this is actually where we use the app server settings, but that could be also the client side that we need the Google tokens that we say test tokens, and the test tokens usually returns a true. If we need to refresh the tokens, well, it's not me doing any tricky OAuth or stuff. It's all kind of hidden by the TMS VCL Cloud Pack, right? And then I get back my new token as a string, and I can store that in the settings and persist it somewhere. Okay, so we are now authenticated, and then we need to check, is the calendar item ID actually null? Or, well, then this is a new item, then we want to add that appointment to the calendar. Or does it have already a calendar item? Then we want to update the calendar item. Yeah, and the last thing is actually that we need to check for deleted items. And here again, we need to see if we are authenticated. And if we are not authenticated, we need to authenticate now. That may actually be because we have no inserts, we have no updates, but we have deletes only. So we never ever get into that part of the process. Yeah, we're only doing that stuff down here. So let's have a look at adding an appointment to the calendar. So you've seen already that I've asked for that we have to create a new calendar item. And with that item, I can then add a calendar ID, actually together with a security token. I also need to store the calendar in which I want to store that item in the future. So I've set up for all my customers, or I advise them to set up a special calendar that they can switch on and switch off, and that they shall not have their stuff in the main calendar of Google. Yeah, but you've seen my calendar was called Test CRM. So that's actually where I store my test cases in and remove them as well later on. So then we've got a start time and we've got an end time. And if we don't have appointment date time, so we don't have an end time, but we're saying it's 120 minutes. That's what the customer said. And now we are building a summary that is quite involved with a lot of data. And that's a bit of an overkill from my point of view, but the customer said, I want to be able to look at my phone, look at the box and see everything before I even hit on the item in the calendar to see the details of the item. So that's why you've got all these different credentials of an appointment in the subject of the item. So the name, the spouse's name, if one of them is deceased, what's the phone number, where is the place, so that you would think that this is actually part of the location. And yes, it is, but he also wanted to have that up on the top in the very first item. So that would be kind of all up here in the title. Yeah, all that goes into the title. Okay, then we need to store the location, and we want to have that in a display format. And then we build the description. And once that's all done, we add the calendar. And finally, we get back a calendar item ID. Yeah, and that is the ID that we can now store against the appointment in our table. And from here on, this is actually now updated. Yeah, it sets the appointment. And when we look into that appointment update, it's updating not only the calendar item ID, but also setting that cal change stamp. So the calendar change stamp when it was last updated is set. So far, so good. Now we dealt with the details of inserting and updating a record. Last but not least, there's also the delete. We should have a look at that. It's not an add appointment, but down here where it says delete a calendar item. Well, it's finding the calendar item, it's then asking the calendar to delete the item, and then it says remove the deleted calendar item from the database. So we're not trying to delete this a second time. Yeah? Okay, so let's run through the test case and we see how that works. So I've got a Google Calendar. I want to add a calendar item. So let's put that item into the database, and we can actually go in here and look at the database appointment. Yes, look at the data. So this is kind of the appointment that I've just put in, yeah, for 2013. So you see how long this application is already running. So then I'm asking for synchronizing my appointment table with the Google Calendar. So it finds something, it's authenticating. You saw that it took a little while, not much, but a little while to authenticate, much longer than actually the query of the database. So now we're in here. It doesn't have a calendar item ID. Okay, so let's look into that. So we're opening the new appointment. So the first query only is a to-do list, right? It not has all the data, but because we need different data depending of is it an add or an update or whatever it is. So that's why we're asking here again. We're building a summary, and when we look at the summary, you can already see it's Joe and Jocelyn blocks with a phone number and a mobile phone number and a street, and it's all nicely separated by pipes. Okay, so that goes into the summary. Then we build a location. Yeah, there's the location. Done. We're adding it to the calendar. Done. We're marking in the database that it's actually done. So, and that means we are kind of done, nothing to process in here anymore. And if we go now for our appointment table and refresh that, yeah, we've got actually our calendar item ID, our DB change stamp, yeah, and the calendar change stamp all there, right, in the database. Nice. Okay. But we also need to clean it up. Yeah, when you do something like that, you don't want to end up with a test calendar that has thousands and thousands of items. So let me quickly show you how I've done that. I've got actually a method on the I've got a method. So sync, that was the add test calendar process. DB helper is good. Get test marked DB tone. There is actually some method. Is it in the tear down? Let me have a look. I haven't looked at that one, unfortunately. Here it is. Delete test calendar item. Yeah. So if I have a calendar item ID in my test case, then I'm using a helper module, and that is actually something that is quite common in my testing, that I've got a data module helper that assists me in looking into the database with a different transaction and connection to prove that what the application server or the data module is supposed to have been done, right, has really happened, because you may have forgotten a commit and it looks perfectly to you, but no one else will see the record. Yeah, so that's why we need a second connection transaction to look into the database. And here we are using that to just delete the calendar item again. Now, this is all working well, but the problem is so far, we've only done it in the main thread, right? And in our test case, it's not a big deal. But if you want to run that in your client server application or even in your multi-tier application, you need to put that into a thread. So let's have a look at that. Who of you has actually programmed the threads so far?
Yeah,
okay.
I have. Yep.
So in newer versions of Delphi, there are tasks and parallels. Now, tasks, you could use a task, but when I started new, that is actually 2014, I didn't have the T-task. I would possibly use the T-task nowadays, which makes the whole thing a bit easier, but it's not so tricky to achieve it with the thread. So let's have a look at that one. Now, in my case, as I said, the thread is actually in the application server. So we need to change over to this one here, and we have a thread. Yeah, Google Calendar thread. That's it. The Google Calendar thread is actually a constructor which just says on terminate is free. So yeah, you want to be freed when you're terminated. And the execute. Now the execute is using an instance of that class that we've just tested, right? Calling process appointment changes. And it's also setting a do on next appointment. Now, consider this. If you had this in your client application and the thread is running, you want to actually shut down the application and you want to stop the thread immediately. Yeah, you do not want to wait, especially when it's service for the whole processing of the appointment changes to be processed before the service is stopped or your application is stopped. So what I've actually implemented here is a cooperative thread, I called it. So that thread, every time he's done one task, he will ask on the next appointment, am I allowed to continue? So if you look at this one here, this is the next appointment. And if you look down into process changes, there's actually the end appointment. So we look at update appointment. No, that is actually set next appointment. Next appointment is true. So there's actually a method to, I don't find it at the moment, but there's a method that actually indicates that he can't continue. So T next appointment, stop processing. Yeah, that is actually the stop processing. So from the outside, we are terminating the thread. The thread is now asked every time from its own data module, right? Am I allowed to continue? And the thread says, yes, I am. Yes, you am. Yes, you are. And in that moment, when you terminate the thread, that processing stops, because in that moment we are finished with we shall shut down the thread. So if we now look at where this thread is generated, so we have a look at the application server. Oops. Why can't I search? Here we are. Good. There it is. So what is a DMO main or an FRM main in an application, in a client server application or a normal application, is my server container here. And if I have set a setting use Google Calendar integration and I've got a Google Calendar ID via which I can do that, and I have currently no thread running, right? Then I want to create that thread and I want that the do terminate method is executed at the end. So the do terminate method actually sets the thread to nil and enables the timer again that kicks in every 5 minutes or every minute, how often you want to actually run that thread in the background. But if you're shutting down that application server and the thread is still running, so we're now kind of here in the data module destroy. We check if the thread is there. We are telling the thread to terminate, and we are asking for the thread to finish. And we are waiting only a very, very short time so that it can just process the next item. And then we can say, hey, terminate all sessions and stop the server, right? So something like that would be necessary in your client too. Yeah, you would need to have a mechanism that the thread itself is kind of, when it's set to terminate, the execute method is stopped. And the way of achieving that is actually that the class who does the real work asks every now and then, not every now and then, but after each item, it's asking, am I allowed to continue? Am I allowed to continue? And at that moment that the thread is terminated, it stops processing. And the rest of the appointment stuff stays unsynchronized. So next time when you start off again, right, and the thread is kicked in, it will resume work where it left off. So this is really the core of it. Any questions? For those ones of you who are not using an application server, would it be clear to you how you would have to amend the code to run this in your client application in the front end? Have I lost you? Do we need to step back and look at the code once more where I've lost you?
Do you want to you want to repeat that question?
So the question is, because I was told that none of you is using DataSnap, fair enough, you don't have to use DataSnap, but if you wanted to use that particular technique in your application, which is a client application, may not even talk to the database, may just have a different storage mechanism, is it clear to you what you need to do in order to move such a thing from an application server into your own application? I mean, you would need that Google Calendar thread in your client-side application too, right? That nothing changes for the server module or for the data module that does the real work, right? But what I call my server container would be your dmain, yeah, DMO main, and it would have to kick off that thread based on a timer, and it would have to make sure that this thread is terminated quickly when you want to close down the application. So that stuff here, which is currently on the server side, would have to move into a main data module on the client side. Yeah?
Yeah, that's right. Now, I'm just thinking not specifically with Google Calendar maintenance, but with other threading tasks that I've done, you know, some of the things that you've gone through in terms of testing. And so that's what I'm ruminating upon at the moment. Yeah, so it's interesting.
Yeah, the thing is actually when you've got the testing hat on, right, you start immediately thinking, oh, threads, no good, no good. I don't want to implement what the thread is about to do in the execute method of the thread because I can't test that so easily. Yeah. So you immediately come up with the idea that the real work of the thread needs to happen outside of the thread, and the thread is using that class as a helper to achieve the work so that I can test the helper without a thread around it. Yeah. So once more.
Are you doing any testing with multiple instances, or you only have a single instance of that thread running? Is that your update thread?
Yeah, and in my case, it's only one, but you could have multiple of them, at least if they deal with separate subsets of appointments. Let's say you had appointments for multiple clients in your database, right? And one thread is responsible for the appointments of a particular client and has its own calendar ID and its own refresh token and access token, right? Then you may have actually 3 or 4 threads running at the same time, depending on how the timing is, right, for your 50 customers, okay? Yeah, and you would have to clean them up all together. So you need a thread safe list of threads. Yeah, and you need to go through that thread safe list, and in each item you need to say terminate, 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 and then you need to wait until the last thread has indicated to say, yes, I'm done, you can shut down. Yeah, but it's possible, and the structure, I mean the technique and the tools to do that is there. There's a threaded list in Delphi, which allows you to do exactly that.
Okay, within DataSnap, is DataSnap running multi-threaded instances of, like, if you get multiple requests coming in at the same time?
So, I mean, there is actually, yeah, I mean, when we look at the container, what's going on here? Why am I losing? Here we are. This is the server, right? That's running and listening on the port, right? And as soon as a new request comes in, it checks via the authentication manager if it's allowed to do that. And once the check was successful, it just spawns off another thread. And I think that even the checking of the authentication is already happening in its own thread. Yeah, we've tested that once. We have a big application server with a database of about 420 data tables in the database, right? And we wanted to know what is the bottleneck called DataSnap, because we heard bad stories about DataSnap, right? So we tested connecting to the server and disconnecting. We're not looking into the database, just checking how quick DataSnap can spawn off a thread and close down the thread again when you disconnect. And we came to 5,000 connections per second. Yeah, and we concluded from that we will never ever have more than 5,000 connections per second in our application. But I think you can get even more if you're not doing this because this is really using Indy in the background, and it's running as a Windows service, and Indy server is listening on a port, right? So you're a bit restricted of what Indy can do. If you move that application server into an ISRP DLL and you run that against IIS, the threading model of IIS kicks in, and you may have more throughput. Yeah. So, but for us, 5,000 connections per second was good enough. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So maybe one more thing for the testing. When we look at the other tests that I've actually implemented, this has nothing to do with the calendar yet, but let me go for the particular test project. This is not the test project, but this is the test project. Let's say here is a U test as person. So the test as person opens the person list, right? So I've got a few parameters to set, right? And I'm checking my my record count here, but let's make a little example of changing something, because this is actually where you are then kind of really changing the database. And how do you get back to square one? Yeah. So all my test cases are derived from a base class, and the base class has a property called run create fixture at teardown. And that means that when I know that my test case is about to apply a change and make a change to the database, I want it at the end to run the fixture again, create the fixture again. And I'm using this helper, because once I've called apply updates, it should be in the database. But now let's assume that my application server was faulty and forgot to call commit, yeah, on that particular transaction. By using another connection and transaction to ask for the last name of that person, I wouldn't be able to see it, right? So this is actually another nice thing that my test helper will quickly show me if anything is not working. So if all my test cases for this, if I just switch on the server-side test case, there are also client-side test cases. I'm not running the server-side, but the server yet, so let's run that. Oopa, cannot open. Yeah, good. Yeah, the license server I haven't started. So here these are a bit, you see the difference, right, between the database and using the REST API of Google. And that's it. So there was only 206 test cases for the server that tests all the CRUD operations and everything, including the Google Calendar integration, right? And without such a set of test cases, I would never ever deploy the application server. Yeah, never ever. Or the client, for that matter. And the idea of using a helper for that, and maybe the create fixture, I should show that, because in the teardown, it says non-test SVM person, inherited teardown. It's not finding it. Let's go there, base test class. So teardown, here we are. If run create fixture at teardown is set to true, we're creating the fixture again. Yeah. And then we're setting the run teardown to fixture false. So that's important because I have seen in the literature people suggesting mock-up objects and so on. Yes, you can all pretend to write to the database, but in the end you do want to write to the database. So why not using the tools that are there to write to the database and then set the database back to square one? And if it's a small database like this one here with about 25 tables and 3 records each, it's very, very quick to set the database back to square one. And even for the bigger project that I'm working on, we've got 420 tables and about 10 to 15 records per table. It takes us about 2 seconds, 3 seconds to restore the database to square one, if at all. Good. So if that's it, then thank you for listening. Thanks for getting an impression. If you want to have assistance in using DUnit or DUnit X in your projects, don't hesitate to contact me, because that is really one of the things that I'm particularly fond of, that I'm not deploying anything without having the test cases for it. And even we start doing tests for the user interface, that is tricky, but it can be done with DUnit as well, not with DUnit X.
Okay, well, thanks for that. You've certainly given me a few things to think about. Yeah, I like the concept of using the database class helper to make sure that the entries are actually there, that you've committed them and are looking like.
Yeah, sometimes it happens and you forgot to commit.
Yes.
Here it's DataSnap, and DataSnap is creating the SQL update statements and insert statements, and also looking after the transaction handling. But if you're responsible for that for yourself because you're writing a traditional client-server application, oh yeah, it can happen.
Well, several people have suggested I should be committed. I'm not quite sure what they meant.
Yeah, and then also the database itself, right? I'm very happy that I've got Interbase or Firebird here, right? Because it has this multi-generational approach for each record. I've seen all weird things with MS SQL Server already, that they arbitrarily escalate a log from a record log to a table log to a database log, and you've got no idea what's going on there.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got multiple threads running it at the same time. This is really tricky. So this is why for my smaller projects, if I can stay away from that big beast called MS SQL Server, I certainly do so.
Well, I guess my other comments are regarding the TMS components, because I've used several of them, and I've always found them to be good and very quick at responding to issues, or I found a couple of minor bugs and been able to either send them the fix, which they've incorporated very quickly, or else they've solved them. But one thing I did notice on there with their Google Cloud was the Firebase ability to talk to Firebase, which is a very interesting database in that it's it uses WebSocket, so you can have your application basically registers what it's interested in, and the database itself, if somebody else updates it, will tell you, hey, here's an update, and push it out to you.
Yeah.
So that's used a lot on web pages and mobile development. So
now we've tried something like that with our bigger project, and there is actually an example in DataSnap for an Echo server. It's really a chat tool, right? So any message that you type is then propagated to everyone else, and they use a channel, and on that channel you can kind of call back into the client. So the client becomes a server and the server becomes a client in that moment. Something similar happens for the Firebird. Firebase database. Yes.
But
we had a problem.
When you work with Firebird as well.
In our case, we wanted to actually build a zip file of all the documents that are kept outside of the database, and that zip file could end up to be 2 or 3 gigabyte in size. And then we wanted to stream that down, and we had problems with the streaming of a JSON object that represents a 3 gigabyte zip file base 64 encoded.
Yeah,
you can imagine. Yeah, that is a bit of a mouthful, right? So trying this the first place made us think twice, and in the end what we did is actually we created a database table that says here's the to-do task of creating the zip file. Then it's actually done in a thread, and the client asks every 20 seconds, is my zip file ready? Is my zip file ready? Is my zip file ready? And after 5 minutes or 5 hours, the application server says, yep, your zip file is ready. And then it calls another one and says, okay, and now please give me the zip file. And that is not a problem. Even 3 gigabyte will stream fairly well on DataSnap, as long as it's not a JSON object base 64 encode. We are using the own format. We are not doing any HTTP, we're not doing any JSON, we are just, we are kind of streaming it as raw power, kind of. We want to get the throughput as much as we want.
Well, that, yes. yeah, HTTP's protocol is useful for some things, but I mean, it's used for streaming, but it's not the
But
most
you spoke
streaming.
about TMS being a really good component developer company.
Yes.
This is my current study project.
All right.
Yeah. Have you guys heard about TMS Web Core?
I've heard about it.
Okay. So you know Pascal very well. You like typed languages. You hate stuff like JavaScript. Why not leaving the task of converting your Pascal code into JavaScript to the experts? And that is what TMS Web Core is about. TMS Web Core is not compiling a Delphi application, but TMS Web Core is transpiling Pascal code into JavaScript so that you can run it on any platform. And the moment where I realized that this is really serious work is when I saw that my Microsoft Teams that I'm using for the church is running in a virtual machine called Electron. And Electron is not Java, but JavaScript, a virtual machine. And it's really, really fast. And with this application, I can actually develop without FireMonkey for Linux, for macOS, for Windows, for Android application, tablets and mobile devices, and for iOS devices. Yeah, all in one. That's really good.
Okay. So, well, that's good. That's a good little advert for TMS, I guess. Yes. Yeah, I've used their Excel component, found that very, very good.
Yeah.
And yeah, very quick to generate or to process Excel files without the need for Excel to be installed, which is always good, especially if you're sitting on a server or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much once again, Matias.
I've got one question that we discussed between the two of us, but we now should ask here the mob. We have a similar small group in Adelaide. And such a meeting like today lives from the questions. Unfortunately, there weren't too many. But I would think that there might be a benefit if we would actually try to run occasionally joint meetings, at least for those groups that have smaller participant numbers. Right, so that we could say every second month is a joint meeting with the Adelaide mob. Right, it now happens that Steve is looking after Canberra from Sydney, and Matias is looking after Adelaide from Sydney. Yeah, so that was our idea. We were wondering how you would think about having once every second month or so a meeting together. It also makes our life as organizers for these meetings easier because we are only in charge every second month.
Yeah. Well, I'm sort of, I don't feel that's a bad idea. You know, I'm very,
I can understand.
I'm time poor at the moment.
I can understand, but I'd like to hear what the others have to say on that one.
Yeah. Hill or Don?
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with that. What's the time difference? Is it going to mean we're going to end up funny times?
Half an hour.
Half an hour. And
they usually start at 6, which is 6:30 our time.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I think that'd be good. Yeah, get some
okay
new
with
faces,
that.
New ideas.
Yeah.
Now we do have for May an evening planned with Sue because her presentation was really good in Melbourne, right? And it's tricky to get the people to present. Also, I really have to say that everyone is an expert in what he or she is doing right now. And don't be shy, just share, even if it's only 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be a polished presentation. Now, I didn't have any slides tonight. I'm really not an expert if I don't show any slides, but I like running things past others and get ideas for how to improve it, right? And you wouldn't believe it how often I've benefited from presenting, even if it's a small presentation at an ADUG meeting, make me think twice if I could actually achieve something even better. So please think about what you are the expert on right now. Yeah.
Oh. All right. Okay. Well, has anyone got any thing that want to discuss? Any issues? Any exciting Delphi computer related or otherwise? No?
Well, I have this personal problem I wanted to talk about.
All right. Well, are you taking the tablets, Phil?
The doctor is in 10 cents.
Yeah.
So,
well,
guys,
well,
what are you working on? Can I ask you just a quick?
Me?
What is? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, mostly what I'm working on is desktop applications that speak to machines.
Mhm.
So I'm doing quite a lot of stuff where I'm talking particularly to Arduinos, and then using Arduinos to interface with machines, control things.
Mhm.
So I run into electronics problems as well as just software problems.
Mhm. That's hard to test at times.
Yeah.
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 I've got
Actually,
a friend of mine here in Sydney writes software to do hearing tests, and he's actually even implemented interfaces to the different machines out there, right? So his application will collect from a serial port, yeah,
Yeah.
what the machine has captured. Okay, so the other day he got a phone call. Your bloody software is useless. I'm not getting a single result, right? And he logged on remotely and looked into it, and he couldn't figure out what's wrong. And so he sent him a message and said, "Please post me your cable." And you wouldn't believe it, on both sides, inside the connector where nothing should happen, all cables were loose. He must have used that cable being angry, saying, "Oh, bloody thing, it's not working anymore," and dashing the connector onto the table multiple times in order to achieve that. Yeah, I can imagine what the problems you're up to.
Well, I must say, I hate soldering those 9-pin DINs. They drive me crazy. Yeah.
I recently wired, because I'm at the other end of the house to where the Wi-Fi is, and now I'm doing, well, I've been working remotely for so long, but I eventually found the hottest day in the summer and crawled in the roof space and ran a physical cable through. But it's been a while since I've been terminating, you know, what are they called? T-base 10, whatever it is. I don't know. What are they called? No, RJ11s or something, 45s, whatever they are. Mm-hmm. Little thingies with the clamper clipper thingies. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while.
RJ45, is it?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
And I measured the temperature near the manhole cover, which was actually significantly cooler than inside the roof. And it was over 45 degrees. So God knows what it was. And of course, it's the furthest, one end of the house to the other. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was my last brush with hardware.
So Hilary, in your situation where you're collecting stuff from machines, Android and what was it called? Arduino, yeah, not Android. Yeah, Arduino machines. Would it make sense to store that off-site? So could you possibly benefit from using the Cloud Pack to access Google Drive or OneDrive or something like that?
It varies. The university is quite stroppy about what we can network these days. Mm-hmm. And we have old equipment that's running even Windows XP. Mm-hmm. We're not allowed to access the network from Windows XP. In fact, it's nothing less than Windows 10 now to access the network. Mm-hmm. So that sort of restricts what I can do. But usually, like the main package I make, what it does is it controls a front end for mixing gases to go to plants for isotope experiments, and then makes up reference mixtures, analyzes them in a laser analyzer, then also looks at the mixture going into the plant and out of the plant, and see what the plant is doing with the various gases and how it's modifying them. So it's all very local.
Yeah. And is there a portion involved that is not Delphi or Pascal? Because on these smaller devices, you may not be able to use Free Pascal or something like that.
Well, on the Arduino, you have to use their version of C or C++. But C is actually better because the C++ has memory leaks, and you've got so little memory you can't afford them. I write a lot of my stuff in Free Pascal, and even on the Raspberry Pis, I can run Lazarus.
Yes, I have seen a project that Peter Wolfgram was working on a few years back. It was a wood workshop where someone had bought all the machine, and people could come in and rent by the minute. Right? They get a card, they can do their little project, and they use the machine. And he had installed a microcontroller to read the cards, and he had used MicroPascal to program those card readers.
Oh, right.
Right? To get a signal back to the application that some machine has been used by a particular card from here to here, right?
Right.
Yeah, and then he could actually store that in the Nexus database and start charging the customer for the use of the machines. But I remember that he wanted to stay within the Pascal language, and that for that reason he found a version of MicroPascal to program controllers.
Right. Well, I tend to do a lot of stuff in Lazarus these days, Free Pascal. But I must admit, you mentioned one of the things I miss, which is Nexus, because there isn't, I think, a Nexus DB that I can build into Free Pascal.
Yeah. But I mean, it's fine to use a Firebird easily, huh? in Free Pascal as well. Yeah, it's not a big deal. You can use the embedded version, and you don't even have a network traffic, so it's really simple.
Yeah,
and fast.
There's
the
also
thing
SQL SQLite.
Right.
I believe that that works with it.
But
as
Hillary,
well.
there was a presentation by Graham Grieve 2 months ago, and he uses Free Pascal a lot for his project, HL7 stuff and processing. And when I looked into it, obviously I was immediately interested in their implementation of the unit. So I had a look, and I started using my little sample application, which I used in 2015 for giving a presentation at a Embarcadero event. And my problem is when you run the test cases and you only select a single test case in the unit, it runs the root, then it runs the next level, and then the selected level, right? And you may actually create environment on that path, right? So the root class may actually create some environment, and the next one may create additional environment, and then only the test case can be executed. In Free Pascal, it just executes the test case. It doesn't care about where in the tree the test case exists, and that marks up my whole testing, right? And Graham said, yeah, I encountered that immediately, and the first thing that I did when I used Free Pascal, I wrote my own implementation of the unit for Free Pascal. Yeah, so if you want to use Free Pascal and do unit testing for it, right, don't even bother using their unit testing tool. Have a look at what Graham Grieve has done, and there's a Git repository that I can, hang on, tests, there's a Git repository that he does, put it in the chat window, where you can get his version of the unit.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, or Free Pascal FVC unit, it's called, yeah. Erwin, what are you working on?
Okay. All right.
Hi. Yes. Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes. Hello. I'm working at the moment on an intraweb application, but I live in Holland, in the Netherlands. So it's here. It's yes. So it's here 10 in the morning.
Yeah.
So what? Well, I like these online presentations. I asked, well, I really also wanted to become a member, but I asked Scott Hollaus, I believe.
Yeah.
But well, he said, well, it was difficult because of tax law of the VAT.
Not at all. You can join up ADUG just by paying with a credit card, right? And Australian dollar is very weak in comparison to the euro, right? So you've got an advantage of joining up now because Australian dollars used to be much stronger, but since we are in a strife with China, no one gives a lot of money on the economy in this country anymore. Yeah,
it's about 1.5, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Really good. So you can go to the ADUG website, say you want to become a member, and you fill in the form, and you end up with a payment gateway, and that payment gateway will process your payment, and then you're an ADUG member. And then that's good because you help us keeping this going here. Right now we're setting up a forum that we want to use as a replacement for the mail list in the future. But it should work so that you can use the form via the web front end, or you can just email like before, right? And you get all the emails back, so that for those ones who are not willing to make the transformation, they still have the advantage of using just an email client at home. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But well, I'm also interested in the ADUG, in the symposium, of course, if it's online.
Yeah.
So well, if I can handle the time difference.
Yeah.
So like I said, it's now in the morning here in Holland.
Yeah, but the symposium will be daytime, so we will start at 10 a.m. or something like that.
Okay, so
it would be 2 a.m. your time, right? But if it's recorded and made available to members only, right, you could join us in the afternoon. You are up and running at 5 a.m. and that's then late morning or early afternoon. And for the rest of the morning that you've missed, you watch the recorded presentations.
Yes, great. I'm interested. Well, really, yes, great.
Last time I had to travel to Europe for business, I always have to see that I combine it with some sort of Delphi event, and I went to Utrecht. And there was the event.
There.
Yeah, there was the event, which made my flight a business trip in Utrecht.
Oh.
I was amazed. Guys, there's 3 lanes of bicycles in front of the traffic light, right? And just 1 lane for cars. Yeah, 1 lane for cars. Imagine that one in Australia. Yeah.
We were in Denmark a couple of years ago, and the terminology there for the people on cycles are the biking Vikings.
Yeah.
I nearly got run over by some, but that's another story. Yes.
So in the type of work, Erwin, that you're currently doing with Delphi, what is it?
It's at the moment
intraweb. Yeah, you mentioned it.
Yes.
Intraweb.
So that is other, but that project is well, it's more or less finished, I guess now. But it was a big intraweb application on IIS with the data snap also. But it was a legacy application.
Okay.
But for internet provider.
So.
Is intraweb used a great deal over there?
Well, not a great deal, but it's okay. Yes, it's active also. Yes, but now with the TMS web core, intraweb exists for almost for 15 years now, I believe. So it's also powerful, but the TMS web core is also very interesting. Yes.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of components that you can add on top of that. So the core is only one thing, but I've actually written an application where the list box wasn't working out so well. So I've got actually on my mobile phone, I've got a PWA. So it's one of the nice things of TMS Web Core is that once you've got the application, you choose how you want to deploy it. And one of the options is that it's a PWA, which is an application completely installed on your mobile phone.
Yes.
And because it's JavaScript, so it can run immediately. It doesn't need an internet connection. And the nice thing is the support for sensors has improved greatly over the time, right? With those different versions of TMS Web Core. So when, let's say, 3 years ago, you could still argue FireMonkey is superior because you have access to all those hardware devices on the mobile device. This is no longer really true. Yeah, that is really very well possible with JavaScript as well by now, and that makes you think twice, right? If you really want to tackle that with something that is very memory consumption. So FireMonkey application is way more data on the device than a JavaScript application. Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, maybe that's a topic for a presentation.
Yes.
Once you finish the book and you've done your homework, yeah.
Well, yeah. But hang on, I'm not the intraweb guy, but maybe, Erwin, we could team up and we say we write a little, you write a little application in intraweb and I'll try to mimic it in TMS Web Core, and then we compare the two and we say what is the strength of each of them. That could be a nice little. It could be also that we create the study group, right, of people wanting to study TMS Web Core, and compare it with other web technologies out there that are available for Delphi. I remember my very first year that I came to Australia, I had a guy called Graham Feely, and he was into horse races, and he introduced me to Interbase 6.0, and we wrote, with the IBX components, we wrote a little application, or started writing a little application that should fetch results for horse races from a website. You know, horse races are a huge thing in Australia, right? And then calculate correlations between jockeys and track conditions and horses and all that stuff. It never went anywhere, but the idea that you've got a group of 4 or 5 people who are using a real world application to learn something new together, I still find that really appealing.
Yes, but with intraweb, you can write a server who can serve a few thousand people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the power of TMS Web Core is you have a client-side application.
Yeah.
And with intraweb, you are developing a server application.
Yeah.
Also. So the two cannot not a comparison on one by one is difficult.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they both have their strength, I believe.
Yeah.
But let's say if you say I want to have a simple application that allows me to write down some notes, right, as I'm going, right, and then you say, and now I want to be able to use on that application, I want to be able to use the speech recognition so that I don't have to type the notes on that bloody small keyboard, but I can actually dictate the note, right? And that's possibly where intraweb then starts to have difficulties to get to that point, right? Yes. But you can do that with TMS Web Core, because it's running on the local device, right? It's easy to switch on the microphone and do the speech recognition. I haven't done it yet, but I would expect it not to be too complicated, right? So it will also be a showcase for how far you can get with intraweb, but how much more you could possibly do with the TMS Web Core. Yeah.
Yes. So, interesting.
So if you want to study it, feel free to contact me. You find my website under maranathaconsulting.com, and I can also post the internet address or email address quickly. So Aaron, so where is it here? Chat window. Yep, there it is. So okay, good. Anything else, Steve, you want to discuss tonight?
No, I'm good.
Good. It became quite talkative, right? But you had to push the people a little bit. That's okay. That's okay.
I'm going to push myself.
That is actually the advantage of knowing your mob, Steve, that you know how to get the information out of them. Yeah.
How to push them. Yes, that's right.
Thank you so much for joining tonight.
Right,
have a nice evening. A nice morning.
All right.
Then. See ya. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Tschüss.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us, Erwin.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.